So closely identify you with the clarinet. Truthfully now, had you been given the trumpet, do you think today we'd know you as Benny Goodman?
I haven't the slightest idea, really. I've given some thought to that, but there it was, the clarinet, all the time.
How'd you end up with a clarinet?
Well, there's a story about that. I think my father took us to a synagogue, which was in the vicinity of the neighborhood we lived in Chicago, and they let you have instruments to play, and if you showed any kind of talent, I think you were either allowed to buy them or they gave them to you. And being that I was very small, I was given a clarinet. My brother, who was bigger than I was given a tuba or a trombone, and the other brother was given a trumpet.
When you started playing swing or jazz, it probably is no different than a youngster today playing acid rock as far as the oldsters are concerned.
You're talking about the objections, possibly, or the amount of volume?
No, I was talking about the style. I mean, it was quite a departure, wasn't it?
Yes, it really was, yes.
What made you do that?
That's the way it came out. In the first place, it was a larger orchestra, not terribly large, really. We only had 5 brass, which is 3 trumpets and 2 trumpets and 2 trombones.
Why didn't you stay with the popular sure thing music? I mean, what were you out there fooling around with swing and jazz for?
Sure thing? Well, what was a sure thing? Who knew?
The old ballads, the pop tunes.
Yeah, but that wasn't going to get you any place, possibly. It was dull. I didn't want to play anything dull. I could have stayed with that in the radio stations or do records with various groups and played dull music all my life. But I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to do something exciting and that I thought was innovative.
Tell me how the Benny Goodman that I subsequently know and heard of, how did you spring into such prominence? It's hard for perhaps the present generation to realize it. You were as big as, if you'll excuse me, the Rolling Stones, or...
In our day, yes. Or at the height of my career, at the Paramount Theater and places like that. Well, as I said, I had this great desire to have a band of my own, which wasn't easy to do. Let me see, a lot of people don't know this, but the first band I had was organized for Russ Columbo. Do you remember that singer? That was many, many years ago. And then in that band was Gene Krupa and, let me see, Joe Sullivan on the piano, who was a great jazz player. And that was my first taste of a band, so to speak.
But what made you catch on? Where did it happen? How did it happen?
After the Russ Columbo episode, I had a band, I put a band together, auditioned for Billy Rose, you know the name? And he had a place on Broadway, which is now the old Sullivan Theater, yes. What was it called? Billy Rose's Music Hall. And we were supposed to play for the show, but being that there were a lot of jazz musicians and didn't particularly like following a conductor, the conductor who was leading the band for the show complained about the orchestra not being good enough to play the show. Well, it was a blessing in disguise, because then I could spend all my time playing for dance music, you see, and let the other band played for the show. And
you're still at the Billy Rose Theater,
yes.
But you're not playing the show, you're paying for the dancers.
Dancing, exactly. People would get up on the stage and dance then. And this went on for a while, and it was kind of difficult because all the musicians would, not kind of difficult, it was terribly difficult, would send substitutes because I couldn't pay any more than union scale, you see. And union scale at that time was a little over $100 or something like that. So if these musicians had other things to do that paid more money, they naturally sent a substitute. So I never knew who was going to be in the band when I walked in. And rather discouraging. You know, I remember many times I stood out and said, well, should I go in here again, or should I just forget it? You know. Well, I kept at it. And one evening, you know, I kind of listened objectively, and I said, by gosh, you know, this is a pretty good band. Well, Claude Thornhill was playing piano, and Arthur Alini was playing tenor saxophone, and Alan Roos was playing guitar. There were quite a few good musicians in it, very talented people. And by this time, we'd played a lot of things together and had some good arrangements. We used to beg, borrow, steal those.
Was Fletcher Henderson in the picture yet?
No, he wasn't, no. I don't think. Anyway, a fellow named Joe Boneem, who I was working for at one of these commercial radio programs, heard I had a band at Billy Rose's Music Hall. And he was with an advertising agency. And they were going to put on a dance program on NBC called Let's Dance. And this program was going to go on for 3 or 4 hours, because in those days, when you went to the West Coast, you couldn't tape or anything like that. You just had to play it over again for the West Coast audience.
Live, play it all over again.
Absolutely.
What year are we talking about now?
We're talking about 1934, 35, something like that. Anyway, he came in to audition my band at the Billy Rose Music Hall, you see, just to audition it for an audition, to see if we were good enough to audition for the radio program. And I had to make sure that I had my entire orchestra there.
It wasn't all substitutes.
It weren't all substitutes, you see. And we had a repertoire maybe of, 15 or 18 songs. And when we finished with this, now I had to get them out of that hall because we had nothing else to play, you see. Well, we did audition for the National Biscuit program, and I remember my elation, you know, when they called me up and told me I did have the program, because it was really one of the big moments of my life, I think. Because here was a whole radio program, and the fellas were going to get paid just as much for this one radio program as they did the whole week at the Billy Rose Music Hall. But not only that, we had a public, and we had a fund or a salary for arrangements, and we could get arrangements made by people like Fletcher Henderson and so forth.
Let me jump you now.
Yeah.
2 or 3 years, we're back in New York, and by golly, Benny Goodman's playing jazz in Carnegie Hall, 1938. It's not such a big deal today.
Not at all, no.
But it's a milestone, isn't it?
Then? Oh, yes.
Were you somewhat bemused? I notice your style is somewhat laid back. Were you bemused to become the Bobby Soxer idol? With kids screaming, shouting, and dancing in the aisles?
Oh, yes, I always was.
Did you like it?
Well, I remember saying to myself at the Paramount Theater, when we couldn't even start to play, kind of all the
call it adulation
and the noise that was going on, that I just sat there on the stage, and my attitude was, well, when you get through with your histrionics and
adulation,
with your show, we'll go on with ours. But I always thought anybody who took that terribly seriously was out of his mind.
What would you tell him? Let's talk about, let's say Mick Jagger today. You've had the experience of being a Mick Jagger for nearly 50 years. What would you advise that young man?
Well, I don't have to give him any advice. He knows exactly what to do. As a matter of fact, you know, I found this out last summer, that I sat in on a jam session with him about 20 years ago in London. Would you believe it? With some friends of mine.
He was about 20 years old then.
Oh, I guess so,
yeah. He was pushing 40.
He reminded me about it.
Did you remember him as a singer?
No, not at all, no.
Let's stay with that for a moment. The Rolling Stones, for example, they haven't played together on concert tour in 3 years.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And you used to play how often? I mean, it's a major difference, isn't it? How often would you play, your band?
Oh, we kept on going all the time. We played 365 days a year.
No.
Yes, or 360 days a year.
How'd you do that?
Well, that's a good question. Played one-nighters, and then if we played a steady engagement, you played at some place like the Pennsylvania Hotel for 3 or 4 months.
One show night?
No, you played the whole evening for dancing. We started at 7 o'clock at night and finished at 1 o'clock in the morning. And then you might have doubled at the Paramount Theater. And then you played 5 shows a day at the Paramount. 7 days a week.
I don't think today's rock and roll kids would believe you.
Probably, well, I don't know if they believe it. They wouldn't do it.
So much for your triumphs. Let's dally for a moment on that Toscanini story. The public, I'm sure, doesn't know it. You were to play Rhapsody in Blue. The conductor was
Yeah, Toscanini. Yeah.
Toscanini, and it was the symphony, NBC Symphony, was it?
That's right, yeah.
Tell me what happened.
Well, I'll tell you what really happened. We had been playing a radio show from the same studio. It was called 8H in 30 Rockefeller Plaza.
There.
I guess it is. Been broken up and whatnot. And I looked on the stage, or walked into the stage, and there were all these chairs there. I don't know, about 80 or 90 chairs. So I said, well, who's been here? And I think it was somebody, Mr. Chotsanoff, who used to have something to do with NBC. And he said, well, the old man, meaning Toscanini's been here. He's been conducting. Oh, I said, really? What is he playing? And he said, whatever, he named a couple of things, and he's also playing the Rhapsody in Blue. I said, Rhapsody in Blue? And sort of joking me. I said, how can he play that without me, see? And he called me a couple of days later, and he said, were you serious or joking about playing the Rhapsody in Blue with Mr. Toscanini? Well, I said, I guess I was kidding, but why do you ask? Well, he said he would like you to play it with him. I said, well, why not? Sure, I'll play it. Well, you know, there's only about 8 bars or something like that, or 16 bars at the beginning.
But it's wonderful. How does that go in the beginning?
I can't whistle. I can't sing it with the glissando. And so forth. And so I started practicing something that I knew very well, because I was going to play it for the maestro, you see. And I had to wait around for about 2 or 3 days rehearsal. He had a habit of keeping people waiting. That is Maestro Toscanini. Finally, it came time to play, and I played it, and all he said was, Benny, meaning good. And I was rather terribly disappointed, because I thought he was going to teach me some wonderful way to play it, you see. And nothing like that happened. And we did finally play the concert, and I think the thing you're talking about, there's a passage there where the clarinet has to go up to a high note. And for some reason, I almost missed it, or just about missed it. And all my
You squeaked.
friends. Yeah, call it, you know, the squeak that was heard all the way around the world. I think they have a record of that someplace.
I read that when you improvise in jazz, you think of the lyrics as you're playing, and if you don't, is that right? Tell me how you do.
Well, I think I do. I particularly think of the lyrics when I try to think of a tempo of a song. The tempo being the pace it should be at, played at. Because I think the lyrics have got a lot to do with that, unconsciously or consciously. Because if there are lyrics that take time to express, then you take a little more time with the song. You take a song like Body and Soul. Well, you can't really sing that very quickly, you know. That's an exaggerated example, but it is an example.
What's your 5 favorite songs? That may sound ridiculous, but I just heard you do that, and it came to my mind. What are the 5 all-time favorites? Well,
I suppose you might call that one of them. And
Stompin' at the Savoy?
Not particularly, no. You would go anything by Rodgers and Hart or one of his great songs, or Gershwin, or Cole Porter, or Vincent Yeoman's.
Too broad for me. Tell me, Body and Soul's one.
Yeah. Well, Cole Porter, just one of those things, maybe. Rodgers and Hart, Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered, just to name one quickly. Vincent Yeoman's More Than You Know. Who else?
Those are wonderful tunes, aren't they? What are the kids today going to do with some clashing acid rock band? What are they going to remember?
I don't know. I haven't the slightest idea, but a lot of them remember the songs we're talking about now. The songs written by some of the great composers.
There is something about the songs that you just named that are truly romantic.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think jazz is romantic?
Yes, I do. I think jazz is romantic. For some reason or other.
You almost blushed when you said that. What?
Well, because a lot of people don't think so. I think it is because good jazz is quite melodic, very melodic. One can improvise usually on tunes that have a melodic substance to them, much more than you can on a so-called jazz song.
You were really, I don't know if it's fair to say this, but somewhat the creation of radio. The medium of radio brought Benny Goodman into everyone's homes.
Yeah, but you'd have to call it records, really. And records are the lifeblood of singers, bands, of everything. And those are the documents, you see, that people have. Radio is a big help. What?
What do you think about the record industry today? It seems to be...
Well, they tell me it's quite quiet, yes. Well, it's completely different than the record industry that I knew. If you go into a record shop now, you have to pick what you want. Most of the salesmen and sales ladies, whatever, they haven't any idea what they're selling, or they don't know of odd, great records around in the shop itself, or versions of tunes.
How many records did you have to sell to be considered a hit?
Then or now?
Then.
Well, I don't know. At one time in the record business, and this is many, many years ago, a record like Blue Heaven by Gene Austin sold, they tell me, about 1 million records. But then the record business went apart after that. And then it came back again around, I guess, if I'm not mistaken, when I entered into it in the early 30s. But by that time, a big record seller was something like 100,000 or 150,000.
Today, that would probably be considered a money loser.
Well, probably, yes.
What does it take to make... I mean, you've been in this business 60 years. Mm-hmm. How in the world did you endure? Sometimes Did you ever feel like giving up, putting down that instrument?
No, not at all. You know, I love to play, and I love to work at it, and I like to keep interested by getting new music to play. That's a good way to do it, you see. And I think you have to have some kind of a goal all the time, whatever it is, to keep you going, one going. And another thing you need that you sometimes lose, that you need vitality if you're going to do new pieces similar to a Bartok piece or a Hindemith piece or something like that. You need an awful lot of vitality, and that's why it's always good to keep up with the younger people.
Finally, talking about the younger people, they should be keeping up with you. What advice, beyond the cliche of early to bed, early to rise, work hard, to really make it as a musician? What does it take?
Well, you know, I remember vividly, I remember Glenn Miller asking me that question once. He said, what do you do to get along in this business? You know, I'm breaking my neck and it was someplace down south, I forget where it was, and I'd already made it a little bit. And I said, look, I can't tell you exactly what to do, Glenn, but don't quit.
Benny Goodman, you promised not to quit, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Pleasure.